I'm standing in the kitchen where we used to make coffee together every morning, watching the steam rise from my cup, like the ghosts of conversations we never quite had. The house feels different now, emptier in ways that have nothing to do with furniture or belongings. It's been 3 months since Kevin Ortiz packed his things and drove away, taking with him the comfortable silence we'd built over 7 years of friendship, roommates who danced around something neither of us dared name until it was too late. The morning light catches the edge of his favorite mug, still sitting in the cabinet where I left it, unwashed since that last Tuesday when everything changed. I remember how he held it between his palms, always warming his hands, even in summer, a nervous habit I'd grown to love without understanding why. Now I know. Now I understand so many things that seemed like simple quirks, friendly gestures. The way he'd linger in doorways watching me read, or how his laugh would catch when I'd accidentally brush against him reaching for something. 7 years. 7 years of sharing this space, splitting groceries, arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash, falling asleep to the sound of his guitar through the thin walls. 7 years of him being the person I told everything to, the keeper of my secrets, my fears, my dreams about writing the novel I never started, my panic attacks about my father's expectations, my confusion about why relationships with women always felt like I was playing a role I didn't understand. He listened to it all with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through my carefully constructed defenses, nodding in the right places, offering advice that was always exactly what I needed to hear. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world, I'd love to know where you are. Drop a comment below and let me know what city, what country, what corner of the earth you're listening from. And if this story moves you at all, hit that hype button to help others find it too. Sometimes the stories we need most are the ones that find us when we're ready to hear them. I pull out my phone and scroll through our old text messages, though I've read them so many times I could recite them from memory. There's the thread from 2 years ago when I was dating Samantha Hughes, that sweet kindergarten teacher with the infectious laugh who everyone said was perfect for me. Kevin's responses were always supportive, encouraging, asking the right questions about how things were going. But now, reading between the lines, I can see the careful distance in his words, the way he'd change the subject when I'd mention her, how he'd suddenly have plans when I'd invite him to join us. I was so oblivious then, so determined to fit into the shape everyone expected of me. Douglas Rodriguez, the reliable son who'd take over his father's accounting firm someday, who'd marry a nice girl and have kids and live the prescribed life that looked perfect from the outside. I'd convinced myself I was happy with Samantha, that the hollow feeling in my chest was just pre-commitment jitters, that everyone felt this detached from their own life sometimes. Kevin never said anything directly, but I remember the night I brought her home for dinner, how he made his famous pasta sauce and set the table with actual cloth napkins, going out of his way to make her feel welcome. She loved him immediately, the way everyone did. Kevin had this gift for making people feel seen, heard, like they were the most interesting person in the room. But that night I watched him watching us, and there was something in his expression I couldn't name. Pain, maybe, or resignation. After she left, we cleaned up together in our usual rhythm, him washing, me drying, the radio playing softly in the background. We'd done this dance hundreds of times, but that night felt different. He was quieter than usual, his movements careful, deliberate. When I made some joke about how well dinner had gone, how Samantha seemed to really like him, he just nodded and said she seemed lovely, that I was lucky to have found someone so genuine. But his voice caught on the word lucky, and when I looked at him, really looked, his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. Before I could ask if he was okay, he turned away, focusing intently on scrubbing a pan that was already clean. I should have pressed, should have asked what was wrong, but I was too caught up in my own narrative, too invested in the story I was telling myself about my life, to notice that my best friend was breaking apart right next to me. The relationship with Samantha lasted another 6 months, limping along on good intentions and shared interests that never quite bridged the gap between us. She was everything I should have wanted, kind and smart and beautiful, with dreams that complemented mine and a way of seeing the world that made me want to be better. But every kiss felt like an apology, every intimate moment like I was borrowing someone else's life. When she finally ended it, sitting in her car outside our house with tears in her eyes, I felt relief more than heartbreak. "You're not really here with me, are you?" she'd asked. And I couldn't argue because she was right. My body was there, going through the motions, but my heart, my attention, my real self was always somewhere else, usually in the kitchen with Kevin, or on the couch watching him play guitar, or lying awake at night listening to him move around in the room next to mine, wondering what it would feel like to be brave enough to knock on his door. That night, after Samantha drove away, I found Kevin in the backyard, sitting on the old wooden swing we'd hung from the oak tree our first summer in the house. He had his guitar across his lap, not playing, just holding it like a shield. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light, and when he looked up at me, I saw something I'd been too afraid to recognize before. "She's gone," I said, settling beside him on the swing, careful to maintain the safe distance we always kept between us. "I'm sorry," he replied, but he didn't sound sorry. He sounded careful, like he was walking through a minefield. "Are you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, and we both went very still. Kevin set his guitar aside and turned to face me fully for the first time in months. "What do you want me to say, Douglas?" The way he said my name, soft and rough at the same time, made something in my chest crack open. "I don't know." "You never know," he said, not unkindly. "That's the problem." We sat there in silence, the swing creaking gently in the night breeze, both of us afraid to move, to speak, to acknowledge what was happening between us. Finally, Kevin stood up, picking up his guitar. "I'm going to bed," he said. "We can talk about this tomorrow if you want." But we didn't talk about it tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. We fell back into our careful routine, polite roommates who happened to share a history, dancing around each other like we'd been doing for years. Except now the silence felt different, charged with possibility and terror in equal measure. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in avoidance. We'd perfected the art of being in the same space without really being together, of having conversations that stayed safely on the surface. Kevin would come home from his job at the music store and disappear into his room, emerging only for necessary interactions about bills or groceries or whose turn it was to mow the lawn. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office, taking on extra clients, anything to avoid the weight of his presence in the house. But late at night, when the barriers we'd built during the day grew thin, I'd hear him playing guitar through the walls, soft melodies that seemed to carry all the words we weren't saying. Sometimes I'd press my ear to the wall between our rooms and just listen, imagining what it would be like to knock, to walk in, to finally say the things that had been building in my chest for years. The breaking point came on a Thursday in October, one of those perfect autumn days when the air smells like wood smoke and possibility. I'd come home early from work, planning to surprise Kevin with dinner from that Thai place he loved, maybe try to bridge the gap that had opened between us. But when I walked into the kitchen, I found him sitting at the table with a letter in his hands, his face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, setting down the takeout bags. He looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than they had that morning. "I got the job." "What job?" "The one in Portland, at the recording studio." He held up the letter like evidence. "They want me to start in 3 weeks." The world tilted sideways. Kevin had mentioned the job application months ago, back when things were still normal, between us. But I'd assumed it was just a dream, the kind of maybe someday possibility we all carry around to make our current lives feel temporary. The idea that he might actually leave, that this house and this life and this careful dance we'd been doing might end, had never felt real until that moment. "Portland," I repeated stupidly. "That's far away, I know." He folded the letter carefully, his hands steady even though I could see the tremor in his shoulders. "It's a good opportunity, Douglas, the kind of thing I've been working toward my whole life." "Right, of course, that's amazing." The words felt like glass in my throat. "When do you have to give them an answer?" "I already did." He met my eyes. I said yes. Something inside me shattered. Not broke, shattered like a window hit with a baseball, spiderweb cracks spreading out from the point of impact until the whole thing comes apart. I stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by the debris of 7 years, and realized I was about to lose the most important person in my life because I'd been too much of a coward to admit what he meant to me. VP. The question came out as a whisper. Kevin stood up, moving to the window that looked out on our backyard, on the swing where we'd almost had this conversation months ago. You know why? No, I don't. Tell me. He turned around, and for the first time in weeks, he really looked at me. No barriers, no careful distance. Because I can't keep doing this, Douglas. I can't keep living in the same house as you, pretending I don't feel what I feel, watching you try to build a life with people who will never know you the way I do. The air left my lungs. Kevin, do you know how hard it was watching you with Samantha? Sitting at dinner, making conversation, pretending I was happy for you, when all I wanted was to tell you that you were settling, that you deserved someone who saw you, really saw you, not just the version of yourself you thought you were supposed to be? I didn't know. Yes, you did. His voice was gentle but firm. Maybe not consciously, but part of you knew. Part of you has always known. That's why you told me about your panic attacks when you couldn't tell anyone else. That's why you'd fall asleep on the couch next to me watching movies instead of going to your room. That's why you'd find excuses to touch my hand when you'd pass me things. Why you'd stand just a little too close when we were cooking together. Each word hit me like a physical blow because they were all true. Every single observation, every moment he'd cataloged, and I dismissed or explained away or buried under layers of denial. The panic attacks that only seemed manageable when he was there, talking me through them in that calm voice that made everything feel possible. The way I'd linger in the kitchen while he cooked, not helping, just watching his hands move, memorizing the way he'd taste things with a wooden spoon and scrunch his nose when something needed more salt. The movies where I'd pretend to fall asleep so I could stay curled up next to him on the couch, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. I was scared, I said finally. I'm scared. I know. Kevin's expression softened. But I can't be scared for both of us anymore. I can't keep being the safe place you run to while you try to figure out how to be someone else. What if I don't want to be someone else? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was brave enough to cross. Kevin stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing my words, trying to decide if I meant them or if this was just another moment of almost that would dissolve as soon as the sun came up. What are you saying, Douglas? I'm saying, I took a breath, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. I'm saying that maybe the reason I never felt right with anyone else is because I was comparing them to you. Maybe the reason I told you all my secrets is because you were the only person I trusted to keep them. Maybe the reason I've been so lost is because I've been looking for something I already had. Kevin's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't move toward me. And maybe that's something you needed to figure out before I left. Maybe that's why this had to happen. Don't go. The words came out broken, desperate. Please, we can figure this out. We can try, Babon. Try what? Try to be something we should have been years ago? Try to build a relationship on top of all this time we wasted being afraid? He shook his head. I love you, Douglas. I've loved you since about 6 months after we moved in together. Maybe longer. But I can't love you enough for both of us. You have to want this, really want it, not just want to not lose me. I crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, stopping just close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to smell his cologne mixed with the scent of guitar strings and coffee that was uniquely him. I do want this. I want you. I've wanted you for so long, I forgot what it felt like to want anything else. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me. His eyes dropped to my mouth, and I could feel the pull between us, the same magnetic force that had been drawing us together and pushing us apart for years. But then he stepped back, putting distance between us again. If that's true, he said quietly, then you'll understand why I still have to go. I don't understand. Because you need to be sure. Not desperate, not afraid of losing me, but sure. Sure enough that you'd choose this life, even if it meant losing everything else. Sure enough that you'd tell your father, your friends, the whole world that this is who you are. He picked up the letter from the table. I'll be in Portland. If you figure it out, if you're really ready, you know where to find me. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of packing, boxes and careful conversations, of Kevin slowly erasing himself from our shared life, while I watched helplessly from the sidelines. He gave away most of his furniture, keeping only what would fit in his car, and I found myself memorizing things I'd never noticed before. The way he folded his shirts with military precision, a habit left over from his brief stint in ROTC. The collection of guitar picks scattered through his belongings like breadcrumbs. The photo of us from our first Christmas in the house, both of us grinning at the camera while wearing the ridiculous matching sweaters his sister Virginia Hall had knitted for us. "You can keep that," he said when he caught me holding the photo. "I don't want to keep it. I want you to stay." Kevin sat down on his stripped bed, looking around the empty room that had been his sanctuary for 7 years. "Do you remember what you told me the night we moved in here?" I shook my head, though I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "You said this felt like home for the first time in your life, not the house, but the idea of building something with someone who understood you." He smiled sadly. "I felt the same way. But understanding isn't enough, Douglas. Love isn't enough if it's not brave enough to exist in the daylight." "I can be brave." "Can you? Can you really?" He stood up, moving to the window that looked out on our backyard. "What would you tell your father if he asked why I moved out?" The question hit me like a slap. My father, Edward Reed, who still asked when I was going to settle down and give him grandchildren, who made casual comments about the importance of family values and traditional marriage. The man whose approval I'd been chasing my entire life, even when it meant living as a stranger to myself. I'd tell him the truth, which is that you're the person I love most in the world. Kevin turned to face me, and when he asked what that means, I opened my mouth to answer and found I couldn't. The words were there, sitting in my throat like stones, but I couldn't make them come out. Because saying them to Kevin in the safety of our house was one thing. Saying them to my father, to my coworkers, to the world was something else entirely. Kevin nodded, reading my silence like a book. "That's why I have to go." The morning he left, I stood in the driveway watching him load the last of his boxes into his car, a beat-up Honda that had somehow made the trip from college to here and would now carry him away from me. The October air was crisp, full of the promise of winter, and I found myself shivering despite my jacket. "This doesn't have to be goodbye," Kevin said, closing the trunk with a finality that made my chest ache. "It can be see you later, if you want it to be." "How will I know?" I asked. "How will I know if I'm ready?" He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "You'll know because you won't be asking the question anymore. You'll just be living the answer." He hugged me then, a real hug, not the careful, brief embraces we'd been sharing for months. I buried my face in his shoulder and tried to memorize everything about that moment. The way his arms felt around me, strong and safe and right. The sound of his heartbeat against my ear. The smell of his skin, familiar as my own. "I love you," he whispered into my hair. "Remember that, okay? Whatever happens, remember that someone loved you exactly as you are." Then he was getting into his car, starting the engine, backing out of our driveway for the last time. I stood there until his tail lights disappeared around the corner, until the sound of his engine faded into the general hum of the neighborhood, until there was nothing left but the empty space where his presence used to be. The house felt enormous without him, every room echoing with his absence. I'd thought I understood loneliness before, but this was different. This was the specific ache of missing someone who'd been woven into the fabric of my daily life, whose absence changed the fundamental texture of everything. Coffee tasted different when I made it for one. The couch felt too big when I watched movies alone. Even the silence was wrong, empty instead of comfortable. I threw myself into work with a vengeance, taking on every project that came across my desk, staying late enough that I'd fall into bed exhausted and dreamless. My father noticed the change, commenting approvingly on my dedication, my focus, my commitment to building a successful practice. If he wondered why Kevin had moved out so suddenly, he didn't ask, and I didn't volunteer the information. But late at night, when the defenses I'd built during the day grew thin, I'd find myself in Kevin's empty room, sitting on the floor where his bed used to be, trying to make sense of what I'd lost and why I'd been too afraid to fight for it. I'd replay our last conversation, searching for the moment I could have said something different, done something braver, chosen love over fear. The first month was the hardest. Every day I'd think about calling him, texting, driving to Portland to show up at his door with some grand gesture that would prove I was ready, that I'd changed. But every time I reached for my phone, Kevin's voice would echo in my head. You'll know because you won't be asking the question anymore. You'll just be living the answer. What was the answer? What did living it look like? I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sharon Ross, a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a way of asking questions that cut straight through my carefully constructed rationalizations. She didn't push, didn't try to rush me toward any particular revelation, just created space for me to explore the parts of myself I'd been avoiding for 32 years. Tell me about Kevin, she said during our third session. He was my roommate, my best friend. Was, he is my best friend, even though he's gone. What made him a good friend? I thought about it, really thought about it, instead of giving the easy answer. He saw me, not the version of myself I thought I was supposed to be, but who I actually was. He never tried to change me or fix me or make me into something else. He just accepted all of it, the good and the bad, and the confused parts I didn't understand myself. That sounds like more than friendship. Yeah, the word came out as a whisper. Yeah, it was. What was it? Love. Saying it out loud to someone other than Kevin felt like stepping off a ledge. I love him. I'm in love with him. I have been for years. DeRoss nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world. How does it feel to say that? Terrifying and right, like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale. What are you afraid of? The list was long and complicated, but when I really examined it, it came down to one thing. Losing everything else. My family, my God, the life I've built. What if I choose him and lose everything else? What if you don't choose him and lose yourself? That question haunted me for weeks. What if you don't choose him and lose yourself? I started paying attention to my life in a way I never had before, noticing how much energy I spent maintaining a facade, how exhausting it was to constantly monitor my words, my gestures, my reactions to make sure they fit the expected pattern. I was like an actor who'd been playing the same role for so long, he'd forgotten there was a person underneath the performance. The holidays were brutal. Thanksgiving with my family, sitting around the table listening to my father hold forth on the importance of traditional values, while my mother, Mary Walker, asked pointed questions about when I was going to start dating again. My sister Barbara Flores brought her husband and kids, and I watched them together, seeing the easy intimacy I'd never felt with any of the women I'd dated, the way they communicated with glances and touches, how they moved through the world as a team. You're quiet today, my mother said as we cleaned up after dinner. Just thinking. About Kevin, your father mentioned he moved out. I froze, a plate halfway to the dishwasher. What did he say about Kevin? Just that he'd gotten a job in Portland. Such a nice young man. I always liked him. She paused, studying my face. You miss him? Yeah, I do. Were you two? She didn't finish the question, but I could see her trying to work up the courage to ask it. Mom, because if you were, or if you are, or if you want to be, that would be okay. You know that, right? I stared at her, this woman who'd raised me, who'd packed my lunches and helped with my homework and cheered at my baseball games, and realized I'd never given her the chance to know who I really was. It would? Douglas, honey, I've watched you for 32 years trying to fit into a shape that doesn't suit you. I've seen you with girlfriends who were lovely and perfect and completely wrong for you, and I've seen you with Kevin, seen how you light up when he walks into a room, how you laugh at his jokes, how you look at him when you think no one's watching. She touched my arm gently. A mother knows. What about Dad? Your father loves you. It might take him some time to understand, but he loves you more than his opinions. Give him the chance to prove it. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by trophies and posters from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, I finally let myself imagine what it would look like to stop pretending. To call Kevin and tell him I was ready, that I'd figured out the answer he'd been waiting for. to introduce him to people as my boyfriend, my partner, the person I loved, to stop editing myself, stop performing, stop living like I was ashamed of the most fundamental truth about who I was. The fear was still there, huge and overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. Relief, the bone-deep relief of finally admitting what I'd known all along. I drove back to the empty house and sat in Kevin's old room, pulling out my phone. His number was still at the top of my recent calls, even though we hadn't spoken in 2 months. I stared at it for a long time, trying to find the words that would bridge the gap between who I'd been and who I was ready to become. Instead of calling, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a text, not an email, but the novel I'd been talking about for years, the story I'd never been brave enough to tell. I wrote about two men who lived in the same house for 7 years, dancing around their feelings, building a life together without ever admitting what it was. I wrote about love that was patient and kind and brave enough to wait, even when waiting meant leaving. I wrote about the courage it takes to choose authenticity over safety, to risk everything for the chance to be truly known. I wrote for 6 hours straight until my fingers ached and my eyes burned, until I had the bones of something real, something true, something that felt like the beginning of an answer. Spring came early that year, and with it, a restlessness I couldn't shake. The novel was taking shape, growing into something I was proud of, something that felt honest in a way my life never had. But writing about courage wasn't the same as living it, and I found myself stuck in the same pattern, talking about change without actually changing. The breakthrough came in April on a Tuesday that started like any other. I was at work reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. Kevin's name on the screen made my heart stop. Douglas? His voice sounded different, older somehow. Kevin, hi, how are you? I'm good, really good. The job is amazing and Portland is... He paused. I'm calling because I wanted you to know I'm seeing someone. The words hit me like a physical blow. Oh, his name is Wayne Watson. He's a sound engineer and he's kind and funny and he knows exactly who he is and what he wants. Kevin's voice was gentle but firm. I wanted you to hear it from me before you heard it from anyone else. I sat there in my office, surrounded by the trappings of the safe, predictable life I'd built, and felt the last of my illusions crumble. Kevin was moving on, building a life with someone who was brave enough to love him in the daylight. Someone who didn't need years to figure out what should have been obvious from the beginning. Are you happy? I managed to ask. I'm getting there. What about you? How's the book coming? You know about the book? Your mom mentioned it when she called to check on me. Of course she did. My mother, who'd been quietly keeping in touch with Kevin, who'd probably been hoping we'd figure things out on our own. It's almost finished. I'm glad. You always talked about writing, but you never seemed to believe you could actually do it. I'm learning to believe in a lot of things I didn't think were possible. There was a long pause, and I could hear the question Kevin wasn't asking. I should let you go, he said finally. I just wanted you to know about Wayne. I didn't want you to be blindsided. Kevin, wait. Yeah? I'm proud of you for being brave enough to go after what you wanted, for not settling for almost. Thanks, Douglas. That means a lot. After he hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the parking lot where I'd spent the last decade of my life going through the motions. Kevin was with someone else, someone who could give him what I'd been too afraid to offer. The window of possibility I'd been circling for months had finally closed, and I had no one to blame but myself. But instead of the crushing despair I'd expected, I felt something else, clarity. Not the clarity of getting what I wanted, but the clarity of finally understanding what I'd lost and why. Kevin had been right to leave, right to move on, right to find someone who could love him without conditions or reservations. And I'd been wrong to think I could figure this out on my own timeline, that love would wait forever while I wrestled with my fears. I finished the novel that night, writing until dawn, pouring everything I'd learned about love and loss and the courage it takes to live authentically onto the page. When I was done, I had 300 pages that felt like a confession, a love letter, and an apology all rolled into one. The book found an agent within a month, a publisher within 3. Suddenly I was doing interviews, readings, book signings, talking about the story I'd written as fiction, but everyone seemed to understand was autobiography thinly veiled. The questions were always the same. Is this based on your own experience? What happened to the character based on Kevin? Are you happy with the ending? The ending. In the book, the protagonist realizes too late what he's lost. And the story closes with him alone, but finally honest about who he is, finally free from the pretense that had defined his life. It was a sad ending, but it felt true, and truth was all I had to offer. It's not really an ending, I told one interviewer. It's a beginning. The character spent so long being afraid of his own life that he forgot how to live it. Losing the person he loved was the price of that fear, but it was also what finally woke him up. Do you think he'll find love again? I think he'll find himself. And once you do that, once you stop running from who you are, love becomes possible in a way it never was before. The book did well, better than anyone expected for a debut novel from an unknown author. It hit bestseller lists, won awards, got optioned for a movie that would probably never get made. My father read it, called me afterward with tears in his voice to say he was proud of me, that he was sorry it had taken him so long to understand. My mother sent flowers with a note that said, I always knew you had this story in you. But the person I most wanted to share it with was 3,000 miles away, building a life with someone else. I thought about reaching out, sending him a copy with a note. But what would I say? That I'd finally figured out what he'd been trying to teach me all along? That I was ready now, 2 years too late? That I'd written a book about loving him and losing him, and it had become a bestseller? It felt selfish, like trying to insert myself back into his life just when he'd finally moved on. Instead, I focused on the changes I could make, the parts of my life that were still within my control. I came out to my colleagues, my friends, the extended family members who'd been politely pretending not to notice that I never brought dates to weddings anymore. Some were surprised, others said they'd suspected all along, but everyone was kind, supportive, accepting in ways I'd never expected. I started dating, tentatively at first, then with more confidence as I learned how different it felt to pursue relationships from a place of honesty instead of performance. There was Stephen Thomas, a teacher who made me laugh and challenged me intellectually, but who wanted someone less complicated, less haunted by past mistakes. There was Edward Reed, a lawyer who shared my love of books and quiet evenings, but who couldn't understand why I still kept Kevin's coffee mug in my kitchen cabinet. None of them were Kevin, and I was learning that was okay. Kevin had been my awakening, my catalyst, the person who'd loved me enough to leave so I could figure out who I was without him. But he wasn't my destiny, just my beginning. 3 years after Kevin left, I got an invitation to Virginia Hall's wedding. Kevin's sister, getting married in Portland, asking me to be there to celebrate with their family. The invitation was addressed to me and a guest, and I stared at it for a long time, wondering if Kevin had known I'd assume. Be invited if he'd objected, if Wayne Watson would be there too. I RSVP'd for one. The wedding was beautiful, held in a garden overlooking the Columbia River, with Virginia radiant in vintage lace and her fiancé beaming like he couldn't believe his luck. I sat in the back, watching the ceremony, thinking about love and commitment and the courage it takes to promise forever to another person. Kevin was there, of course, as the best man, looking older and more settled than I remembered. His hair was shorter, his shoulders broader, and when he smiled during his sister's vows, I could see the contentment that had been missing during those last months in our house. He looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way that made my chest ache with a mixture of joy and loss. Wayne was there too, sitting in the front row, and I could see what Kevin meant about him knowing exactly who he was. He had an easy confidence, a way of taking up space without apology, and when he caught Kevin's eye during the ceremony, the look that passed between them was intimate and sure. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, I found myself standing alone by the river, watching boats drift past in the golden evening light. I'd planned to leave early, to slip away before the dancing started, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Douglas? I turned to find Kevin walking toward me, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. He looked nervous, uncertain in a way that was achingly familiar. "Hi," I said, accepting the glass he offered. "Beautiful ceremony." Virginia looked radiant. She did. Kevin stood beside me, not too close, both of us looking out at the water. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either until I was on the plane." "How are you? I read the book." My heart stopped. "You did?" "Of course I did. It was beautiful, Douglas. Heartbreaking and beautiful and so honest it hurt to read sometimes." He paused. "I'm proud of you for writing it, for putting yourself out there like that." It was the only way I knew how to tell the truth. The truth about what? I looked at him then, really looked, taking in the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, the way he held himself like someone who'd finally found his place in the world. About you, about us, about how much I loved you and how afraid I was to admit it. Kevin's breath caught. "Douglas, I'm not telling you this to complicate your life or to try to change anything. I know you're with Wayne and I can see how happy you are. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything. I did need to figure it out on my own. I needed to lose you to understand what I'd had." We stood there in silence, the sounds of the wedding celebration drifting over from the garden. Finally, Kevin spoke. "Do you remember what you asked me the night I told you I was leaving? How you'd know when you were ready? You said I'd stop asking the question and start living the answer. Are you living the answer?" I thought about the life I'd built in the 3 years since he'd left, the book that had come from my pain and confusion, the relationships I'd pursued from a place of honesty instead of fear, the conversations with my family, my friends, my colleagues, where I'd finally stopped editing myself, the quiet contentment I'd found in my own company, the way I'd learned to be alone without being lonely. "Yeah," I said, "I think I am." Kevin smiled, the first real smile he'd given me since I'd arrived. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Douglas. You deserve to be loved for exactly who you are." "So do you, and it looks like you found that." I did. Kevin glanced back toward the garden where Wayne was talking to Virginia's new in-laws, gesturing animatedly about something that made them all laugh. "He's a good man, patient and kind, and brave in all the ways I needed someone to be. I'm happy for you, really. I know you are. That's what makes this so hard." "What?" Kevin turned to face me fully, and I could see tears in his eyes. "Seeing you like this, finally comfortable in your own skin, finally honest about who you are. 3 years ago, I would have given anything for this conversation. For you to look at me the way you're looking at me now, without fear or shame or reservation." "Kevin, but it's too late, isn't it? We missed our moment, our chance, whatever you want to call it. And now we're both building lives with other people, and this is just what might have been." The words hung between us like a bridge we couldn't cross, beautiful and heartbreaking and absolutely true. We had missed our moment, not through malice or indifference, but through the simple human failing of not being ready for love at the same time. Kevin had been brave enough to leave when I wasn't brave enough to ask him to stay. And in the years since, we'd both grown into people who could have loved each other fully, completely, without reservation. But love isn't just about being ready. It's about timing and circumstance, and the thousand small choices that lead us toward or away from each other. Kevin had chosen to move on, to build something real with someone who could meet him where he was, and I had chosen to finally become the person I should have been all along. Both choices were right, even if they meant we couldn't choose each other. "I don't regret it," I said finally. "Losing you, I mean. Not because I wanted to lose you, but because losing you taught me how to find myself. You gave me the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. You loved me enough to leave." Kevin's tears spilled over then, and without thinking, I reached out to wipe them away. He leaned into the touch for just a moment, and I memorized the feeling of his skin under my fingers, the way his eyes fluttered closed like he was trying to hold on to something he couldn't keep. "I should go back," he said. "Wayne will be wondering where I am." Course. But he didn't move, and neither did I. We stood there by the river as the sun set behind the mountains, two people who had loved each other imperfectly but truly, saying goodbye to what might have been. "Will you dance with me?" Kevin asked suddenly. "Just once before we go back to our separate lives?" I could hear the band starting up in the garden, the first notes of a slow song drifting over the water. Kevin, I don't think, please, I know it's selfish and I know it's complicated, but I just want one dance. One moment where we don't have to pretend we're just old friends who used to live together. I looked back toward the garden where I could see Wayne talking to Virginia, both of them laughing at something. He looked secure, confident, like a man who knew exactly where he stood in Kevin's life. And maybe that security was what made this possible. This one small allowance for the past we'd shared. Okay, I said, one dance. Kevin took my hand and led me to a small clearing away from the reception, where the music was just loud enough to hear, but quiet enough to feel private. He pulled me close and I let him, resting my hand on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the evening air. We swayed together in the fading light, not really dancing so much as holding each other. And I felt the last piece of my heart that had been holding on to what we'd lost finally let go. This wasn't about getting Kevin back or changing the course we'd both chosen. This was about honoring what we'd meant to each other, acknowledging the love that had shaped us both, even if we couldn't keep it. Thank you, Kevin whispered against my ear, for coming tonight, for writing the book, for becoming who you were supposed to be. Thank you for leaving, I whispered back, for being brave enough to love me and strong enough to let me go. When the song ended, we stepped apart, and I could see in Kevin's eyes the same peace I felt in my own chest. We'd found our closure, our way of saying goodbye to the people we'd been and the love we'd shared. It wasn't the ending either of us had imagined, but it was honest, and it was kind, and it was enough. Kevin walked me back to the garden, where Wayne was waiting with a patient smile and a fresh drink. He shook my hand warmly, told me how much he'd enjoyed my book, invited me to visit them in Portland anytime. There was no jealousy in his manner, no possessiveness, just the quiet confidence of a man who knew he was loved completely. I left the wedding as the dancing was getting started, driving through the Portland streets toward my hotel, feeling lighter than I had in years. In the morning, I'd fly back to my life, to the book tour that was taking me across the country, to the dating apps and dinner parties, and all the messy, complicated work of building a life as my authentic self. But tonight, I'd had my moment with Kevin, our dance by the river, our chance to say, well, goodbye properly. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 6 months later, I got a text from Kevin, a photo of him and Wayne at their own wedding, both of them beaming in matching suits, surrounded by friends and family in what looked like their backyard. The message was simple. Living the answer, thank you for helping me find it. I smiled, saved the photo, and started typing my response. Congratulations. You both deserve all the happiness in the world. Then I put my phone away and went back to my writing, to the new story I was working on about second chance and chosen family and the different ways love can save us. Outside my window, spring was arriving in all its messy, hopeful glory, and I was ready for whatever came next.